airplanes falling out of the sky, would have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue to then come forward with solutions.
Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us this evening. I'm Errol Barnett. At this moment, we are about 30 minutes away from President Biden addressing the nation from the Oval Office. This will be his first public remarks since his decision to drop out of the presidential race on Sunday. An excerpt of his speech obtained by CBS News reads, quote, "I have decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation. That is the best way to unite our nation." Earlier, the White House press secretary rejected the notion that Vice President Kamala Harris would take on significant new roles in government now that she's the likely Democratic nominee.
Nothing is going to change. The president is the president of the United States. He's going to continue to lead this administration the way that he sees fit. They are partners. They are partners.
CBS News' Skylar Henry joins us now from Capitol Hill with a bit of a preview of what the president will say. Skylar, that's the unique role the president is in. He has 6 more months on his term, but now this decision to step off of the re-election ticket. So what tone do we expect from Mr. Biden tonight?
Yeah, Errol, I think what is safe to assume in terms of what we can expect is, one, in terms of the rhetoric that we've heard from President Biden since before he actually got the job, when he was on the campaign trail leading up to the 2020 election and talking about the preciousness that is democracy and why it is so important to protect it. In fact, one of the other excerpts that the White House released, it says that the defense of democracy is more important than any title. I draw strength and find joy in working for the American people, but the sacred task of perfecting our union is not about me. And I think that is what we're going to continue to expect from President Biden as he makes his remarks. I tell you, something else that we will probably hear a lot from is what the president plans on doing over the course of the next 6 months since he did decide to step aside. I think his legacy will certainly be something that comes up. Also, what he plans on doing in terms of policies as well. Just in the last several days and weeks, it was reported that the president had eyes on sweeping ideas surrounding the Supreme Court, including the possibility of term limits and perhaps even introducing a code of ethics. Now, those sorts of things are the types of things that would need to have congressional approval. But really, that's the type of thing we're talking about here in terms of legacy and for President Biden. And so I think in terms of his message tonight, obviously we'll hear why he decided to step aside in the first place, right? Following these weeks, if not months, of saying that he was going to stay in this race, but also how the American people can look ahead in terms of the remainder of his term.
You know, Scarlett, it was interesting watching the White House press briefing today. Biden's press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, would not answer why Biden is stepping out of the race, but she did specifically say President Biden is not doing this for health reasons. Why, in your view, is she being so specific in saying that while elsewhere not saying it much at all?
Well, remember, this was a tumultuous time for what was the Biden campaign, right? The last month or so, there were concerns not only from opposing lawmakers, but from those within his own party about his mental acuity and his ability to perform and whether he would be able to serve out another 4 years. Remember June 27th, Errol. I think that is a very important date, right? That was the debate between Biden and former President Trump down in Atlanta, where he struggled at times to really complete his message and complete answering certain questions and what he wanted to do in terms of policies. And I think that sort of sounded the alarm, if you will, from top Democrats and concerned donors who simply said that something needs to be done. And so really there was this pressure campaign, if you will, both publicly and privately, at least what we've learned, where lawmakers, those close to the president, those in his inner circle, really asked whether he was okay and whether he could actually do this job. I think it'll be very interesting to hear what he has to say, if he addresses any of that. And, of course, obviously why he decided to endorse his vice president, Kamala Harris, as you pointed out in that excerpt, if you will, using his words to pass the torch to the new generation.
And I'm wondering, now that Biden is a lame duck president, he's there until inauguration of January of next year of the next president, how much can he really accomplish now in his final 6 months?
Well, the White House says that he's not a lame duck president. There is a lot in terms of his legacy. I know that that he wants to continue to accomplish. I talked about what we could potentially see as far as new policies surrounding the Supreme Court at least being introduced. But there's also what the administration has been able to accomplish over the course of the last 3.5 years, namely surrounding cost cutting for medical expenses and also addressing things surrounding the economy. And I think it's probably safe to assume that we could expect a continued push in terms of trying to introduce measures to codify reproductive rights following the overturning of Roe versus Wade several years ago. And so I think that that is something that we will continue to see and hear from President Biden. Obviously, some of that from the likely Democratic nominee, Kamala Harris, as well. But I think that, along with trying to get those hostages back in terms of the Israel-Hamas crisis, also doing things to address the immigration crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border, I think that's something else that we could possibly hear the president speak to tonight. A long list of things that we knew that he wanted to accomplish as it related to the campaign trail. So I think it'll be interesting to see what he decides to pull from in terms of his message and his plans, at least from the campaign trail, and what he wants to accomplish over the course of the next 6 months.
Yeah, that's a great detail. Skylar Henry, we appreciate that update. Thank you so much. And a reminder, we will bring you all President Biden's speech as soon as it happens at 8 p.m. Eastern. You're in the right place right now here on CBS News 24/7. We want to get you the latest on what former President Donald Trump is up to. He's currently campaigning in Charlotte, North Carolina. This was Trump's first campaign since President Biden announced he's dropping out of the race. The former president launched several attacks on his presumptive opponent, Vice President Kamala Harris, saying she, quote, can't be trusted and is unfit to lead. Trump also spent a large portion of this rally discussing the attempted assassination attempt against him, which was nearly 2 weeks ago now. For more on all of this, let's bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian. You see her there at the Trump rally in Charlotte. Nicole, how is former President Trump changing his messaging now that the Democratic ticket is changing?
Yeah, well, Errol, you can probably see that the former president is still talking behind me. He's been speaking for well over an hour, at times kind of hearkening back to some of the themes and lines that we heard from his speech in the Republican National Convention just last week. But to your point, he really is making that pivot to take on Vice President Kamala Harris, and she is the likely Democratic nominee. He has issued a litany of attacks against the vice president, as you mentioned, saying that she is unfit for office, at one point referencing her as a lunatic, oftentimes mispronouncing her name. He says that he believes that she is not tough on crime. He has said that she is a border czar, which is a line of attack that we have heard from Republicans criticizing her role in terms of the border and immigration policy. And most notably, he's really tried to paint her to the left of President Joe Biden, suggesting that she is a radical liberal, more liberal than the president is, and suggesting that her form of, quote, California socialism will destroy the country. So that's just a preview of some of the lines of attack that are likely to come from the former president, as we have just about 100 days left in this campaign.
And Nicole, it's interesting because, I mean, it's remarkable that it's been nearly 2 weeks since Trump was shot at his rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. There was an expectation that perhaps his tone would change. We heard him allude to unity at the Republican National Convention and then go right back to his common talking points. But one thing that has changed, we understand, is security around his campaign events. From your view, how has the security posture adjusted since then?
Yeah, well, it still remains a concern, I will say. In talking to a lot of rally goers, they say that they do feel safe in spite of what happened 2 weeks ago in Butler, Pennsylvania. But as you can see, we're inside an arena here in Charlotte and not outside. So the campaign indicated that they at some point intend or hope to get back to having outdoor rallies, but certainly that requires a different security posture. But even just looking at him tonight, I mean, I can count more than a half a dozen Secret Service agents kind of surrounding the stage as he is speaking now. And the president, interestingly, former president, we were kind of squinting to see if the bandage was removed off of his ear since that rally. Of course, you remember that he had the big white bandage and dressing for a number of days, including at the Republican National Convention. But now it appears he just has a very small flesh-tone bandage on his ear. So that is something notable, or something noticed that we saw. Also, the former president really taking a lot of time when he took a break from speaking about the vice president to talk about what happened that day, and the fact that, you know, the crowd, in his view, really stood by him. He talked about the fact that when people hear gunshots, normally they run, but people stood and stayed and made sure that he was okay. He joked a little bit about the incident, as much as you could joke about, you know, a near-death experience. But, you know, of course, we heard that hot mic at the time that the shooting happened, where, you know, he was covered by Secret Service agents, and, you know, he said, "Where are my shoes? Where are my shoes?" So he kind of joked, you know, yeah, those shots and them pouncing on me knocked me out of my shoes. So he did try to have a bit of levity out of that moment, as serious as it was, but certainly something still weighing heavily on the president and the former president as he discussed that account here at tonight's rally.
And I guess that also speaks to the ways in which Trump enjoys telling good stories to a crowd that listens. At the RNC, he said he would tell the story once, so he doesn't have to tell it again. But certainly it is remarkable, and I know everyone in that room certainly thankful, all of us, that he survived, and so it's understandable why he would share it again. Nicole Killian, we appreciate you reporting on this for us there in Charlotte, North Carolina. Thank you. Now, before he dropped out of the race, President Biden had amassed a multi-million-dollar war chest, and that money does not just disappear now that he's no longer the candidate. The Trump campaign, meantime, is arguing that money cannot go to the likely Democratic nominee, Vice President Harris. And as we dive into that, we thought we'd answer a simple question. What are the rules here when it comes to how those funds can be used and where they can be moved? Well, take a look at this. How much money is at stake? The Biden campaign, Democratic National Committee, and joint fundraising committees had a war chest of about $240 million. That's what everything on your screen adds up to. Of that, the majority of the money, about $145 million, is with the DNC and joint fundraising committees. Those groups can spend the money however they'd like in support of the Democratic ticket. Now, the Biden-Harris campaign had $96 million as of the end of June. And because Harris was on the ticket with Biden, some campaign finance experts are arguing Harris has immediate access to these funds because she was listed in the FEC filings alongside Biden when his campaign was organized. Now, to make the change more official, though, take a look at this. The Biden campaign filed with the FEC to change the group's name to Harris for President. Now, while Harris is likely the Democratic nominee, she doesn't have the official nomination just yet. That is scheduled to come in August. Trump's team argues the Biden campaign simply changing the name on the FEC filings from Biden to Harris does not legally allow her to access those $96 million in funds. And some campaign finance lawyers argue that under FEC law, she wouldn't have access to that money until both she and Biden were made the official nominees by the DNC. Now, Vice President Kamala Harris will head to Texas tomorrow. It's her next stop in what's become a full week of campaigning across the country. CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman joins us now from Houston. Willie, what has been the overall messaging from Harris and her new presidential campaign? We're just a couple days into it now. What are the common themes you're noticing?
Hey there, Errol. Good to be with you from Houston, Texas. Well, Vice President Kamala Harris has already hit the campaign trail. We got a little bit of a preview of that campaign message that she's testing with voters just yesterday. She talked about her record as a prosecutor in California. Listen.
I took on perpetrators of all kinds. Predators who abused women, fraudsters who ripped off consumers, cheaters who broke the rules for their own gain. So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type.
And the vice president talking about former President Donald Trump there, so you can anticipate that she'll repeat that message a lot more as we head into the campaign and as she heads to be the likely Democratic nominee. Now, it's a message that she'll need to pitch to a key group of voters, the Biden campaign or the Harris for president campaign, as you mentioned, and that has been noted. She essentially believes that she can win over Latino voters, black voters, women, young voters, bring about that coalition from 2020 and expand upon it. That's what the Harris campaign is saying that they're going to do this November, Errol. What's interesting also, Willie, is that she says that she's raised a record amount of money for a presidential candidate within a time frame, more than $100 million. She says that's from a lot of first-time people donating money. And so there's this groundswell of enthusiasm. They've had to upgrade the venues where Harris has been speaking because of interest. And she now has a major decision to make on who will be her running mate, her vice presidential pick. What's the latest on who's in the mix and how the process is moving? Yeah, the campaign is talking about the enthusiasm that they're seeing. Over 3,000 people in that event that Harris attended yesterday. They're saying that that is a campaign record for this Democratic ticket. But behind closed doors, a lot of other things are happening in terms of the Veep stakes. We know and CBS News is reporting that a dozen individuals are being vetted to be a running mate for Vice President Harris. So they're casting a wide net, so to speak, in terms of who can be on the ticket with her. I think we have a graphic that we can show our viewers at home. Yeah, a couple of big names here, and some of these big names have already endorsed Kamala Harris to be the Democratic nominee. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. You have North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper, Andy Beshear from Kentucky. You have Tim Walz, J.B. Pritzker from Illinois, Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan. And some of those who aren't governors on this list, Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona and Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, as well as Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Errol? And we can't rule out another surprise for all of us that we weren't expecting. Stranger things have happened. People not on a short list. Willie James Inman, thanks for the update. We appreciate it. All right, still to come for you all. We'll speak with a historian about the broader impact of President Biden's speech and the effect it may have on the election moving forward. You're in the right place. You're streaming CBS News 24/7.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail.
What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7
that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
President Biden's decision to leave the race followed a poor debate performance in June. It sparked discussions about his health and about replacing him on the Democratic ticket among lawmakers. In his address tonight, in just a few minutes, the president is expected to look forward, laying out what he plans to accomplish in his final 6 months in office.
Tonight, the president will discuss his historic decision to put the country above all else and about the inflection point we face as a country in this moment. This is one of those rare moments in history when the decisions we make now will determine the future of our nation.
For more on this, let's bring in CBS News political contributor Joel Payne. He's in our D.C. bureau. Joel is a Democratic strategist and the chief communications officer for Move On. Joel, this will be rare tonight, an Oval Office address. Mr. Biden has, I think, only done this twice before. What are Democrats looking to hear from him, considering the mission is explaining why he's stepping off the ticket, but also keeping enthusiasm to win for Democrats in November?
It's good to be with you, Errol. Yeah, I mean, what Karine was saying there earlier at the podium, I think is part of what Democrats are looking for, is to explain the president's thinking about why he made this historic decision. I think we can all make a guess that he's made the political assessment that this is what's best not only for his party, but for the country. But to dig a little bit deeper into his thought process as he steps aside and does this, really rare thing that I think a lot of Democrats receive as patriotic and selfless, to put the country, to put the betterment of the political fortunes of his party ahead of himself. So I think they're going to look to hear that. And I think also a little bit of cementing the legacy, not just of the 3.5 years of the Biden administration, but really, Joe Biden for 50 years as a senator, as a vice president, chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I think starting to tell the story of Joe Biden as a part of the last half century in American political life. I think we'll look to hear both of those things tonight.
It's also, though, Joel, embolden Republicans and a GOP argument that, look, if he's not fit or well enough or confident enough to stay on the ticket, then he should get out of the White House now. He has 6 months left in his term. How much weight does that carry, or how much of a risk does Biden expose himself to by acknowledging that those two things are true, that he wants to finish his term but not run again?
Yeah, I think most fair-minded people would just view that as bogus and understand what it is, which is a political attack to not only disparage Joe Biden, but also set up an attack on Kamala Harris. So I don't think the president should spend much energy trying to dissuade those folks. These are folks who came up with a sham impeachment related to him and his family. And I think they're looking for the next thing to hang on him for political fortune. It's pretty clear to me that Joe Biden can still do the job, even probably beyond this election day. It's just a matter of, could he do the job 4 years from now, that he made the assessment that he could not. I mean, we saw Joe Biden just 2 weeks ago, stand for 10 minutes and go with the foremost foreign relations reporter for the New York Times, David Sanger, about trans-Pacific policy. Joe Biden has led the nation out of the COVID morass. He's led the nation to a $2 billion infrastructure package. Those aren't things that you can't do if you're infirmed. So I think Joe Biden's work has proven that he can do the job.
All right, and we wait to hear that speech. Joel Payne, great to see you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Errol.
For more on all of this, let's bring in presidential historian Doug Brinkley. He's the Catherine Sanoff Brown Chair in Humanities and Professor of History at Rice University. What a day to speak to you. Several lawmakers and some folks out there have just said they think President Biden should withdraw from not just the race, but from the White House immediately. Historically speaking, what does the sitting president need to acknowledge as he tries to smooth out this transition from his re-election to the election of a potential President Harris?
I think right off the bat, President Biden has to show the world that he's not infirmed. After all, he has announced he had COVID. He's been holing up in Rehoboth, Delaware, on the beach. And then, he did have a telephone call with Kamala Harris there, but that's different than seeing the president. So the backdrop's the Oval Office. He's sending a large message. I'm in charge. I'm the commander in chief. He will do a little bit of legacy spinning. He does not want anybody to think that he got out simply because of a health concern, because that leads into the conspiracy he's been covering up for a long time, wouldn't take a cognitive test. Instead, he wants to put it as part of a democratic principle of hope and rejuvenation, that we're a nation. Democracy means passing a baton on, and he's passed that baton to Kamala Harris, who's more than fit to become president, and he's going to do anything he can for her. But he cannot turn this into just a rah-rah pro-Kamala Harris talk, nor can he simply, recount all the things he accomplished as president. This is not a farewell address. That comes in January. It's really waking people up to the fact Biden's still in town, and he's got a lot of business to do, particularly ceasefire in the Middle East and keeping NATO strong.
And Doug, you mentioned cognitive health and his cognitive ability. Ironically, it was about 4 years ago that I was able to interview Vice President Joe Biden at the time as part of a journalist panel ahead of the election. And I asked him about the cognitive test question because Trump was pushing it back then as well, and he scoffed at it. He mocked it. He made fun of me for asking the question, which I guess goes to show what's changed in 4 years. It's been something that he laughed at 4 years ago to something being taken much more seriously now, although the White House is clarifying he's not doing this for any health reasons. Why is that so crucial, considering that obviously his public performances have waned?
Because when Biden decided to run for re-election in 2024, he cut off all these other Democratic candidates, saying, I'm staying in. Many people thought Biden was a placeholder in the Democratic Party. He got rid of Trump, rah-rah thing, got a deal done and was going to start building the bench. Instead, he went for it himself. But in this past December, people like David Axelrod and James Carville, the New York Times, and others started questioning his cognitive health. And then when he didn't do interviews or any 15-minute interview for the Super Bowl, people were really worried that something's wrong. But he gave that a State of the Union address, and it kind of was a relief in the Democratic Party. And then, alas, the debate against Donald Trump, where he disassembled. And it's really been a drip, drip, drip for him either to resign as president and turn it over to Kamala Harris, or announce he's not running for re-election, but be her biggest booster and do what he can to help her not just defeat Donald Trump, but defeat Trumpism in America.
And in just a couple words, in our last few seconds, what is the one thing you want to hear from Biden tonight?
That he's in charge, and that he's not going to drop the ball, and that he knows the stakes are high, and that he is fully ready to continue doing the business of the American people. Reassurance that we don't have a president that's infirm like we had with Woodrow Wilson many moons ago.
All right, and we'll find out if he does, in fact, do that. Doug Brinkley, thank you so much. As a reminder, we're just a few minutes away now from President Biden's address to the nation. We'll be speaking from the Oval Office and is expected to explain why he made the momentous decision to leave the presidential race and not run for re-election. CBS News correspondent Skylar Henry is back with us now from Capitol Hill. Skylar, you were reading us some excerpts from the speech earlier. I'm wondering if there's anything else that has jumped out to you that we expect the president to say here in just a few moments.
2 points. A, the passing the torch to the new generation. I think we're seeing that. And we heard from Willie James Inman earlier in terms of watching the vice president, who is the likely Democratic nominee, sort of get this wave of enthusiasm, wave of support behind her as she hits the campaign trail. So I'd be interested to see where the president decides to take that in terms of his remarks in a couple of minutes. Also, this last excerpt that we got from the White House that talks about the great thing about America is here. Kings and dictators do not rule. The people do. History is in your hands. The power is in your hands. The idea of America lies in your hands. Powerful words that we can expect from the president, and as he really talks about democracy so beautifully and really talks about how fragile democracy is. And so I think that language surrounding that, what the president wants to do over the course of the next 6 months, what he hopes to accomplish, and really how he can pass this baton, if you will, to the next generation in the name of the vice president, all things to certainly pay attention to.
Yeah, it's really remarkable as you say that, Skylar Henry. You know, Joe Biden, with a more than 5-decade career in public office, now coming to an end. Thank you for your time. And there was a picture of the White House we're looking at right now, a live picture, as the sun sets over the nation's capital right ahead of Biden's momentous announcement. It really is the end of an era in Washington. A CBS News special report on President Biden delivering an address from the Oval Office will begin in just a few moments. You're watching CBS News 24/7, and as soon as this address has ended, we'll be back with you with more live coverage and analysis.
This is a CBS News special report. I'm Norah O'Donnell in Washington. Tonight, we will witness history. It's been more than 50 years since a sitting president decided not to seek a second term. President Biden in the Oval Office right now will explain why he quit the presidential race. These are his first public remarks since making that announcement and endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris. Tonight's speech comes at a momentous time in American history. Less than 2 months ago, former President Trump was convicted on 34 fraud charges. Then there was President Biden's disastrous debate performance in Atlanta. And just 11 days ago, Trump survived an assassination attempt. All of these events leading to Sunday's announcement and tonight's address to the nation. Mr. Biden, we are told, will say, quote, "The defense of democracy is more important than any title. This sacred task of perfecting our union is not about me. It's about you, your families, your futures. It's about we, the people." He's also expected to elaborate tonight on what lies ahead, how he's going to finish the job for the American people, in his words. There's still 6 months left in his presidency, and we know that there are many challenges left for him to tackle in office, including 2 wars, the U.S. southern border, and the migration crisis and inflation. Here now, the president.
My fellow Americans, I'm speaking to you tonight from behind the resolute desk in the Oval Office. In this sacred space, I'm surrounded by portraits of extraordinary American presidents. Thomas Jefferson wrote the immortal words that guide this nation. George Washington, who showed us presidents are not kings. Abraham Lincoln, who implored us to reject malice. Franklin Roosevelt, who inspired us to reject fear. I revere this office, but I love my country more. It's been the honor of my life to serve as your president. But in the defense of democracy, which is at stake, I think it's more important than any title. I draw strength and I find joy in working for the American people. But this sacred task of perfecting our union is not about me. It's about you, your families, your futures. It's about we, the people. We can never forget that, and I never have. I've made it clear that I believe America is at an inflection point. One of those rare moments in history when the decisions we make now will determine our fate of our nation and the world for decades to come. America's going to have to choose between moving forward or backward, between hope and hate, between unity and division. We have to decide, do we still believe in honesty, decency, respect, freedom, justice, and democracy? In this moment, we can see those we disagree with not as enemies, but as fellow Americans. Can we do that? Does character in public life still matter? I believe I know the answer to these questions because I know you, the American people. And I know this: we are a great nation because we are good people. When you elected me to this office, I promised to always level with you, to tell you the truth. And the truth, the sacred cause of this country, is larger than any one of us. And those of us who cherish that cause, cherish it so much, a cause of American democracy itself, must unite to protect it. You know, in recent weeks, it's become clear to me that I need to unite my party in this critical endeavor. I believe my record as president, my leadership in the world, my vision for America's future, all merited a second term. But nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy. That includes personal ambition. So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation. That's the best way to unite our nation. You know, there is a time and a place for long years of experience in public life. There's also a time and a place for new voices, fresh voices, yes, younger voices. And that time and place is now. Over the next 6 months, I'll be focused on doing my job as president. That means I'll continue to lower costs for hardworking families, grow our economy. I'll keep defending our personal freedoms and our civil rights, from the right to vote to the right to choose. I'll keep calling out hate and extremism. Make it clear there is no place in America for political violence or any violence ever, period. I'm going to keep speaking out to protect our kids from gun violence, our planet from climate crisis that is the existential threat. And I will keep fighting for my cancer moonshot so we can end cancer as we know it, because we can do it. And I'm going to call for Supreme Court reform because this is critical to our democracy, Supreme Court reform. You know, I will keep working to ensure America remains strong, secure, and the leader of the free world. I'm the first president in this century to report to the American people that the United States is not at war anywhere in the world. We'll keep rallying a coalition of proud nations to stop Putin from taking over Ukraine and doing more damage. We'll keep NATO stronger, and I'll make it more powerful and more united than any time in all of our history. I'll keep doing the same for our allies in the Pacific. You know, when I came to office, the conventional wisdom was that China would inevitably surpass the United States. That's not the case anymore. And I'm going to keep working to end the war in Gaza, bring home all the hostages, and bring peace and security to the Middle East and end this war. We're also working around the clock to bring home Americans being unjustly detained all around the world. You know, we've come so far since my inauguration. On that day, I told you, as I stood in that winter, we stood in a winter of peril and a winter of possibilities. Peril and possibilities. We were in the grip of the worst pandemic in the century, the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. But we came together as Americans, and we got through it. We emerged stronger, more prosperous, and more secure. Today, we have the strongest economy in the world, creating nearly 16 million new jobs, a record. Wages are up. Inflation continues to come down. The racial wealth gap is the lowest it's been in 20 years. We're literally rebuilding our entire nation, urban, suburban, rural, and tribal communities. Manufacturing has come back to America. We're leading the world again in chips and science and innovation. We finally beat Big Pharma after all these years to lower the cost of prescription drugs for seniors. And I'm going to keep fighting to make sure we lower the cost for everyone, not just seniors. More people have health care today in America than ever before. And I signed one of the most significant laws helping millions of veterans and their families who are exposed to toxic materials. You know, most significant climate law ever in the history of the world. The first major gun safety law in 30 years. And today, the violent crime rate is at a 50-year low. We're also securing our border. Border crossings are lower today than when the previous administration left office. I've kept my commitment to to appoint the first black woman to the Supreme Court of the United States of America. I also kept my commitment to have an administration that looks like America and be a president for all Americans. That's what I've done. I ran for president 4 years ago because I believed and still do that the soul of America was at stake. The very nature of who we are was at stake. And that's still the case. America's an idea. An idea stronger than any army, bigger than any ocean, more powerful than any dictator or tyrant. It's the most powerful idea in the history of the world. That idea is that we hold these truths to be self-evident. We're all created equal, endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. We've never fully lived up to it, to this sacred idea, but we've never walked away from it either. And I do not believe the American people will walk away from it now. In just a few months, the American people will choose the course of America's future. I made my choice. I've made my views known. I would like to thank our great Vice President Kamala Harris. She's experienced, she's tough, she's capable. She's been an incredible partner to me and a leader for our country. Now the choice is up to you, the American people. When you make that choice, remember the words of Benjamin Franklin hanging on my wall here in the Oval Office, alongside the busts of Dr. King and Rosa Parks and Cesar Chavez. When Ben Franklin was asked, as he emerged from the convention going on, whether the founders have given America a monarchy or republic, Franklin's response was, a republic, if you can keep it. A republic, if you can keep it. Whether we keep our republic is now in your hands. My fellow Americans, it's been the privilege of my life to serve this nation for over 50 years. Nowhere else on earth could a kid with a stutter, from modest beginnings in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and Claymont, Delaware, one day sit behind the resolute desk in the Oval Office as President of the United States. But here I am. That's what's so special about America. We're a nation of promise and possibilities, of dreamers and doers, of ordinary Americans doing extraordinary things. I've given my heart and my soul to our nation, like so many others. I've been blessed a million times in return with the love and support of the American people. I hope you have some idea how grateful I am to all of you. The great thing about America is here, kings and dictators do not rule, the people do. History is in your hands. The power is in your hands. The idea of America lies in your hands. We just have to keep faith, keep the faith, and remember who we are. We're the United States of America, and there's simply nothing beyond our capacity when we do it together. So let's act together, preserve our democracy. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you.
And there we have it, the President of the United States, President Joe Biden, this historic moment that we are witnessing together, and a speech that met that moment in its soaring rhetoric in defense of democracy, saying nothing can stand in the way of saving our democracy, and that includes personal ambition. Want to bring in our chief political analyst, John Dickerson. This is a speech no president wants to give. And it hasn't been a similar one in 50 years where he has to say, I'm not running for a second term.
No, and you can imagine, Nora, the weekend when he made this decision, President Biden, sick with COVID, recognizing this is the end of his career, his life in politics, that just how heavy that must have been. But tonight he marshaled all of that and said, that my personal ambition is not bigger than the stakes. And the stakes are, several different apocalyptic versions of what would happen should Democrats lose this election. And what was at stake included things like, does character in public life still matter? So he set the stakes, then put it all in the American voters' hands. It's all in your hands. You have to make, he seemed to be saying explicitly and implicitly to American voters, you have to make a momentous decision like the one I just made. And then, of course, the personal reference to himself as a kid with a stutter. You have the most powerful man in the world suddenly shrinking himself to a little kid as a way to tell the story of the promise of America, that no matter what your beginnings, you can end up in the Oval Office. Some soaring rhetoric for a president not necessarily known for that kind of rhetoric.
You know, he also said, do we still believe in honesty and decency? That was right before that line you just mentioned. Does character in public life still matter? That's clearly a reference to Donald Trump.
Absolutely. Not just the office, not just the foreign policy challenges, not just opportunity and whether it exists in America anymore, but whether the stuff inside of the American story, honesty, character, decency, respect, that's all on the table, too. I mean, he put all the different chips and stakes in the center of the table tonight.
Robert Costa, and you heard that emphatic endorsement of his vice president and also noting it's time for a generational change, which the Democratic Party, like many in the base, have wanted.
And President Biden tonight adopting the rhetoric of one of his heroes, the late President John F. Kennedy, passing the torch to a new generation of Americans, a new generation of leadership inside the Democratic Party. Ahead of this speech tonight, I've been speaking with some of his closest advisors, and there has always been a tension at the heart of the Biden presidency. He is so ambitious, and he talked about that tonight. I always think about March 1st, 2021, Nora. He brought in senators to the Oval Office, and he looked up at the portrait of FDR on the wall, and he said, that's where we're going. He wanted to have a New Deal-sized presidency on domestic policy and on foreign policy. He wanted to be truly in command. But the tension has always been, with that ambition, has always been why he got into the race in the first place. Donald Trump. Charlottesville in 2017, the white supremacist march pulled him back into the riptide of politics. He decides to run in his political winter. And it is Donald Trump's ascendancy once again, which is making him move toward this decision to leave the Democratic presidential race.
And Ed, you cover the White House, and in talking to the president's advisors, right, that FDR model. And he has had a legislatively successful presidency, reaching bipartisan achievements in many ways. And yet he has struggled to communicate that.
He has. And listening to what he wanted to work on in these final 6 months, it's a gargantuan list: inflation, the economy, civil rights and abortion rights, fighting extremism, gun control, climate change, his cancer moonshot project.
Middle East peace.
Middle East peace, which may be on the verge of a real breakthrough in the coming days. But what has always been the case with this president, from his campaign to tonight, is the editorial consistency, if you will, of his words and his mission. We're the United States of America. There's nothing we can do if we don't do it. Every single speech ends that way. But tying his inaugural to this farewell address, to talk about the winter of peril and the winter of possibilities, and hearkening back to that again today. One of the people he's been working with over the last several days, of course, is Mike Donnellan, his longtime speechwriter, who sits there with him and says, how do we tie all these things together? Remember, you're fighting for the soul of the nation. Tonight, pretty good capstone to all that work, if, in fact, this is the last speech many Americans remember from him.
I want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, Nancy Cordes. And Nancy, want to get your reaction to the president's remarks tonight.
Nora, we're getting a little bit of color from inside the Oval Office while this speech was taking place. And you've been in the Oval Office yourself many times. It's not that large of a room, but we're told that 39 people were crammed in there with the president to watch and pay tribute this evening as he gave this very difficult speech. Chief among them, his wife, Dr. Jill Biden, his children, Ashley Biden, Hunter Biden, and several of his grandchildren. This is a president who is famously close to his family, and we know that his family members, from our reporting, were among those who were pushing him to stay in the race as long as he was willing to do it. So it's a difficult moment for him, a difficult moment for his family. And in fact, Ashley Biden, his daughter, we're told, had her eyes closed and was nodding silently and breathing deeply as her father spoke. And at one point, she even dabbed her eyes with the sleeve of her shirt. This is a 51-year career here in Washington for President Biden that will be coming to an end now in 6 months in a way that no one in the family thought it would.
There's more to talk about with the president's remarks tonight, but I also want to mention that Donald Trump is in Charlotte, North Carolina tonight, where he took credit for Joe Biden dropping out of the race. I want to bring in CBS's Nicole Killian. She was there for the rally. And Nicole, I was able to listen to part of it, and he pretty much said tonight, no more Mr. Nice Guy.
Yeah, that's right. And look, the former president just ended his speech here in Charlotte. But before his speech, one of his aides told me that he would address President Biden tonight, given that he was making this speech at the White House. But when I asked if he would be more gracious or more pointed in his comments, the aide told me, well, he's just going to be Trump. And that's exactly what we saw from the former president tonight. He said that we defeated President Biden when he exited the race 3 days ago and suggested the Democratic Party leaders pushed him out. But he did make that hard pivot, really focusing the bulk of his speech on Vice President Kamala Harris, at times mispronouncing her name. Take a listen.
For 3.5 years, Lion Kamala Harris has been the ultra-liberal driving force behind every single Biden catastrophe. She is a radical left lunatic who will destroy our country.
So Trump continued to argue that Vice President Harris is unfit to lead. He went on to, as you heard him there, really tried to paint her to the left, the extreme left, saying that she is more liberal than President Biden, more liberal than Bernie Sanders. He called her a border czar, which is a phrase we're hearing Republicans use more often. He said that she is not tough on crime and tried to counter that by unveiling a new endorsement tonight from the National Association of Police Organizations. So it was quite a litany of attacks that the former president had against the vice president, and certainly a sign of things to come over the next 100 days of this election, Nora.
Nicole Killian in Charlotte for us. Thank you very much. And ahead, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker will join us, and we'll look at the potential Democratic vice presidential candidates, including Governor Pritzker.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Coming up, our series, wait a minute, Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
Human remains found this week.
As you know, 3 days ago, we officially defeated the worst president in the history of our country, crooked Joe Biden. So now we have a new victim to defeat, Lion Kamala Harris, Lion, L-Y-I-N apostrophe.
On the night that President Biden gave that historic speech, that was from the former president at his rally in Charlotte tonight. One person mentioned as a potential vice presidential candidate for the Democratic Party is Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. Governor, good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I do want to talk about the president in just a moment, but I want to give you the opportunity to respond to those attacks tonight from Donald Trump, who is calling the vice president a radical left lunatic who will destroy our country.
Look, that's all they've got is name calling. You know, we're talking about a woman who's going to stand up for women's reproductive rights, who has had a long history of standing up for workers' rights and voting rights and civil rights. And Donald Trump, of course, believes in none of those things and is on the attack against just average, everyday working people across the United States. So I think the contrast is clear. They're going to throw invectives. We're going to talk about the issues.
Governor Pritzker, I know you listened to President Biden tonight from the Oval Office and know him well. It was a soaring speech where he talked about nothing can stand in the way of saving our democracy. That includes my personal ambition, and talked about the stakes in that race. What did you make of his remarks?
You know, I have to say, I listened to it, and there was a particular part of it where he talked about, democracy being more important than one person. It's about the American people. And I can't imagine Donald Trump ever saying anything like that. Remember that Joe Biden has spent 50 years serving the public, not for his own interests, but to make sure that the working families of America have someone that they can rely upon in public office. That's been Joe Biden. He's a person of honesty and integrity, and we should all be proud that we've elected a president like this and look at all that he's accomplished. I know that earlier in your program you talked about, some of your guests talked about the allusion to FDR and all that he accomplished. Think about what Joe Biden did in just 3.5 years, getting bipartisan legislation passed, not just on gun safety and protecting a woman's right to choose, but think about the big issues like CHIPS and Science Act and the infrastructure bill, and of course the Inflation Reduction Act, and the way that he fought climate change and made sure that we're bringing manufacturing back to the United States. I mean, I'm proud of all that he's accomplished. We all should be, and we should want to elect somebody going forward who's a believer in those values and in carrying on not only the traditions of FDR, but the ones that have been established by Joe Biden, too.
He also had this turn of phrase where he said there's a time and place for long years of experience, but there's also a time and place for new voices, fresh voices, yes, younger voices, and that time and place is now. Has this decision united the party? How has it changed the party?
Well, part of it is that Joe Biden being willing to make this sacrifice of his own career and future because he believes in democracy. I'm so proud of that. And I must say that in Kamala Harris, we have the kind of person who's going to carry on a tradition of democratic values that most Americans really believe in. And she's somebody that's going to make sure that we take that case to the American public in a way that is so hard for the Republicans to respond to that you've seen all they've got is invectives to throw. So I'm very proud of what we're going to see going forward over the next, 100 days of this campaign. And I do believe that the prosecutor is going to be able to prosecute the case against the 34-time felon accused of and convicted of fraud.
And Governor Pritzker, it's been reported today that you spoke with Kamala Harris on the phone. You're on the list as a possible vice presidential candidate. Did you talk about being her running mate?
Look, I'm not going to talk about the private conversations that I've had. As you know, I've been traveling the country, making the case for Democrats all across these great United States. I'm going to continue to do that until Election Day and beyond. And I must say that again, Kamala Harris has energized the party. I think we're all excited about the opportunity going forward to make this case, to win back all the voters that, well, frankly, weren't so turned on by both candidates, but now see Kamala Harris as a real opportunity to carry this country forward.
Governor Pritzker of Illinois, good to see you, and we'll be in your state in August for the Democratic Convention.
It'll be a great summer in Chicago.
We'll see you soon. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Vetting a vice presidential candidate usually takes months, but today the Democratic Party said that Kamala Harris will have to name her running mate by August 7th. And CBS News can report that the Harris campaign is considering about a dozen contenders. That list includes governors, a senator, and those who aren't in elected office, including some cabinet secretaries. Want to bring back in Nancy Cordes, who is at the White House. And Nancy, walk through some of the governors that have been discussed, in addition to Governor Pritzker, who we just talked to.
Well, Nora, I'm just getting my microphone back on because we went running to investigate.
Nope.
We hear some big cheers behind us.
Nope. Well, you know what? Then hold on. I'll bring in Robert Costa next to talk about some of the other governors, too. Governor Beshear has been mentioned.
Let's bring up that list again of all the contenders here. We'll go through them very quickly. Governor Beshear of Kentucky is near the top of the list. Youthful, could maybe bring the South into play for the Democrats. But you also have the Sun Belt in Arizona, really on the radar for Democrats. So Senator Mark Kelly, married to Gabrielle Giffords, who was survived an assassination attempt. He's a former astronaut. And so he's someone they really believe could bring people into the coalition from Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, that part of the country. It's a tough strategic choice, though, for Vice President Harris when she looks at the map. Does she want to play in the Sun Belt? Does she want to play in the Deep South? Democrats have made gains in places like North Carolina, especially in Georgia, with 2 Senate seats. But it's also about personality, character. Who does she connect with? Who does she have a personal relationship with? I'm told she is close with Senator Kelly, but there's also the possibility somebody from the outside, though retired Admiral McRaven, Bill McRaven, who oversaw the bin Laden raid, he's taken himself out of consideration at this point. But there is a thought inside the White House, maybe broaden the net at this point of the discussion.
Is it about personality or is it about something more, especially in a tight contest like this? Mark Kelly, would he bring Arizona and its 11 electoral votes? Or does she need Governor Shapiro for the 20 electoral votes and the must-win state of Pennsylvania?
And that's part of the calculation between her and the senior staff of the campaign, because they still see ways to win both those areas. The blue wall, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Maybe Minnesota has to be worried about too now because the Trump surge has kind of started, or he's at least seeing some growth. And then the Sun Belt, Nevada, Arizona. There's concern about New Mexico. Do you need to bring someone from there? And what would it be like to have 2 Westerners, essentially, on the ticket? That would be new as well. So all of those things are factors, but perhaps the biggest one is going to be if she's a prosecutor and a senator and someone who's been a vice president from the West, from an urban area, do you perhaps have to worry about geography and where someone else can bring in some more votes?
And you have to engage in the age-old debate about whether vice presidential candidates really matter at all. Now, as soon as I say that, there was a time when people said, well, you know, debates don't matter either. Debates matter. Yeah. So nevertheless, you have to figure out that question. And one thing about Kelly that has been, somebody's mentioned to me about why he might be an attractive candidate, is because we can see from Donald Trump's speech and already the attack lines from Republicans is they're trying to say it. Kamala Harris is the other. She is someone else outside of the American story. If you pair that with an astronaut, there's nothing more at the center of the American story than an astronaut. So in that sense,
mother was a cop.
Yeah. And so in that sense, the pick helps you with the central candidate. So that's a way to think about this, too.
Yeah, I want to bring back in Nancy Cordes with the microphone on, Nancy, because I know you've been doing a lot of reporting on this, too.
No problem. I mean, just to explain to you what just happened, the reason I ripped the microphone off was because suddenly we were standing here and heard this huge cheer from behind us in the direction of the Rose Garden, and then heard the president's voice saying, hello, hello, hello. And so we went running to investigate and see what was going on. It turns out that hundreds of White House staffers stayed late here at the White House this evening to gather together to watch the president's speech. And then it sounds like they went either over to the South Lawn or into the Rose Garden. After the speech, the president emerged from the Oval Office and greeted them. And we couldn't hear much of what he was saying. We could just hear the crowd periodically cheering. These are people who have worked for President Biden, in some cases a few years, in some cases decades. He is beloved here. And it's really been a bittersweet time for staffers here who are glad that he has made a decision, but also feel pretty sad about the way that things have turned out. And so I just wanted to fill you in a little bit on that moment, which was a kind of an interesting and bittersweet moment happening here at the White House. Now, back to what you've all been talking about, which is the hunt for a vice president. What we learned today is that the list of potential VP candidates that are being vetted in earnest is about a dozen, maybe 11, maybe 13. They include many of the governors that you've been discussing, a couple of cabinet secretaries as well. And there are also a couple of people on the list, I'm told, who are not in elective office right now. We're working to learn who those individuals might be, but we're told that some of the people who are being looked at began having conversations with the vetting team yesterday. They're on a compressed timeline. They want to get this done within the next couple of weeks.
Nancy Cordes with all that reporting. Thank you very much. And ahead, we'll talk more about the president's historic speech tonight.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this.
What is at stake here? What is the answer then?
Do you know why?
You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government that? Why won't you say the word crisis?
You're not answering my question.
Is that scary?
Does that make sense?
What do you mean?
What does that mean in
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
What happened? Why?
It's time for the CBS News Original 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
There is no more room in our city.
New York City is receiving record numbers of migrants.
Today, we're going to have more than 500 adults and children come through that door.
Tensions rise as shelters reach max capacity.
We don't have to take care of them.
CBS Reports goes inside a crisis cities and families are facing as they fight to survive.
The United States still has that glimmer of hope for people to come here.
Fighting for a future. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
How fast do you think you were going?
195 miles an hour.
This is incredible.
How close did you actually come to being killed?
That close.
Is this brain surgery without a knife?
It is.
What risk do these children pose to Russia?
I'm not sure the world is prepared for this change.
Definitely not.
Who's the best coach in college football today?
Let me see a mirror.
It's time for the CBS News Original 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go, with the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes.
Like a John Grisham novel come to life.
Real lives.
He pointed a gun to me and said, "This is the day you die." And he shot me.
Real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
I'm an innocent man, and I hope the whole world can see it now.
Catch the latest episodes. Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
If zombies took over the world, where would you go, Gil?
Where would you go? Where would you hide? Oprah's house.
Very good.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
But this sacred task of perfecting our union is not about me. It's about you, your families, your futures. It's about we, the people. And we can never forget that. And I never have.
The president tonight saying, "I revere this office, but I love my country more." For the first time, addressing the American people and explaining why he wanted to step down from re-election. John Dickerson, it was a remarkable speech, a historic speech.
And a deeply personal speech. And, you know, he had to do 3 things. He had to talk about the personal reasons, also talk about the stakes and set them up, connect those two, and then create a path for his vice president. And when he talks about the future, when you watch Vice President Harris talk about the future, because of her age, because she is that new generation that he talked about, it's much easier for her to talk about the future. She conveys future, whereas that was always very difficult for him. You know, this is only the 4th Oval Office speech. This will be the one everyone remembers.
Mm-hmm. Robert, I'm also just struck how much he talked about character in public office.
He underscored character at every turn, and he avoided the reality of this moment, which is that this was a very painful decision for President Biden to make. His family, as Nancy reported, in the Oval Office with him. They were with him in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, last weekend, thinking through, could he find a way to stay in this race? Because for President Biden, you talk to his family, his closest advisors, he was counted out from day one in his 20s, in law school, making his way up the ranks in Delaware, runs for the Senate at the age of 29, surprises everyone by winning in 1972, surprises everyone when he endures personal tragedy with the death of his wife and daughter, serves in the Senate. I've talked to some of his colleagues in the Senate. They said he was discounted in the Senate. Some of the older senators thought he was a nobody, a kid. Took him decades to formulate his own presence in the United States Senate. He flames out in 1988, deals with an aneurysm, a plagiarism scandal. He always has pushed back against those who say Biden can't make it. Biden's not major league level in politics. He just trudges forward. And he was going to trudge forward again. But he relented this time because he likes to associate, as he did at the top of the speech, with the grander idea of America and American presidential history. He wants to be remembered clearly as someone who put character above personal ambition.
And that is in many ways what will continue to be fought out on the campaign trail. Want to point out tonight something that John noticed on X, which is a tweet. What do we call it now on X? Another way. Something on X.
Who knows?
Post on X. Yes. By Jill Biden, in which she talks about thanking those who never wavered, to those who refused to doubt, to those who always believed. My heart is full of gratitude. Thank you for the trust you put in Joe. Now it's time to put that trust in Kamala. Love, Jill. That handwritten note to those who never wavered. Who's she sending a message to?
And hat tip there to our Annie Cohen, who highlighted that to me. She's talking about all those people who pushed out President Biden, as Bob was just talking about, the people who were putting the pressure on the door that tough weekend in Rehoboth, and who were saying, essentially, if you don't make the decision, we're going to help you make it for yourself, which is to say there's more coming. And what Joe Biden is saying is there were lots of people who were not putting that pressure on him and still believed in him, in keeping with that long history, that there's a core person to believe with in there. That's a pretty striking statement.
And for many in the Democratic Party, Joe Biden had become, and the issues that he was having communicating what he had accomplished had overshadowed the ability to focus on the issues. And Ed, this campaign is going to be about the economy. It's going to be about money, people's pocketbooks. It's going to be about immigration, all of that. And I know you're taking a closer look at those issues tonight because I think people want to know, what is the difference on these issues between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump?
Yeah, and look, the contrast is sharp. She's, of course, a 59-year-old woman, former prosecutor and senator who would be the first female president. Donald Trump's 78 years old, a businessman and former president, and would be the oldest commander-in-chief ever by the time he ends a potential second term. And when it comes to issues voters worry most about, Harris and Trump are far apart.
I will proudly put my record against his any day of the week.
4 months from now, we will have an incredible victory.
Immigration and border security remain a top concern.
The invasion at our southern border, we will stop it, and we will stop it quickly.
Former President Donald Trump and other GOP critics call Vice President Harris the so-called border czar. But President Biden asked her to focus on the root causes of immigration, not border security. A visit to Central America and Mexico in 2021 was widely panned.
Do not come. Do not come.
She supports the president's decision to use executive authority and restrict border crossings, and illegal crossings from Central America are down significantly from when she visited. Trump says if reelected, he'd restart construction of a border wall, move to end so-called birthright citizenship, and deport millions of undocumented immigrants. Access to abortion services is a top focus for Harris.
This is a health care crisis, and we all know who was to blame. Donald Trump.
He nominated 3 justices that voted to end Roe v. Wade. Now, Trump says he wouldn't sign a federal abortion ban, believing it's up to each state to decide. Hoping to avoid the issue, the Republican National Committee even watered down mentions of abortion in the official GOP platform. And Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, has a more restrictive view, as he's supported a national abortion ban in the past. Harris wants to restore federal abortion protections.
When I am president of the United States, and when Congress passes a law to restore those freedoms, I will sign it into law.
On the economy,
we will end the inflation nightmare that you would have never had. We had no inflation.
Trump has laid out several specifics. He'd like to cut the corporate tax rate and has made a direct appeal to working-class voters.
When I get to office, we are going to not charge taxes on tips, people making tips.
He wants to impose a 10% tariff on all U.S. imports, a move economists warn would lead to higher prices for consumers.
He intends to give tax breaks to billionaires and big corporations and make working families foot the bill.
As a senator, Harris voted against Trump's U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade deal. She's quickly adopted Biden's focus on the middle class.
Building up the middle class will be a defining goal of my presidency.
But just a few days in, she's not yet said what she'd do to fight inflation and boost the economy. On foreign policy, Trump often says the war in Ukraine wouldn't have happened with him in office.
I could stop wars with a telephone call.
He and Vance have said the war isn't of vital interest to the U.S. In the Middle East, Trump also supported Israel's fight against Hamas, but has also criticized Benjamin Netanyahu's leadership. Harris is closely involved in Biden's handling of the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East. Alongside him for most of his national security briefings, she's also attended key global conferences around the world and met with hundreds of world leaders, including 6 meetings with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in the last 2 years. And we get a chance to see how Harris and Trump would fare on the world stage starting tomorrow when she meets with Prime Minister Netanyahu here in Washington. Then he's headed down to see Trump at Mar-a-Lago on Friday, Nora.
Thank you, Ed. That was nice to hear the contrast between the two of them. Thank you so much. And up next, from money to memes, we're going to take a closer look at Kamala Harris's momentum and how former President Trump is reacting.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
How would you say Tony and Nate?
You mean not say?
I swear they should have a camera during the commercial. It's such a good time here.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
Just a few months, the American people will choose the course of America's future. I made my choice. I've made my views known. I would like to thank our great Vice President Kamala Harris. She's experienced, she's tough, she's capable. She's been an incredible partner to me and a leader for our country. Now the choice is up to you, the American people.
President Biden tonight explaining not just why he won't run again, but why he endorsed his vice president, Kamala Harris. And we should note campaign donations are surging now that the vice president has risen to the top of the ticket. Deep-pocketed donors and millions of grassroots voters are putting their money on the table. The campaign saying today they've raised $126 million. But will it be enough to keep up with Donald Trump's own growing war chest? Our senior business correspondent, Jolene Kent, has the story.
We are not playing around.
Campaign contributions are flooding in for Vice President Kamala Harris.
I had over 400 texts, emails, and phone calls from people saying, I want to raise money, I want to donate money, how can I help? Pretty crazy, yeah.
John Hennis is the former finance director for Harris's 2020 presidential campaign.
And I actually see this short amount of time between now and the election to be a good thing, because we are all coming together as a party.
This after some of the party's big donors hit pause in the wake of President Biden's disastrous debate performance.
With the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with.
But when the president stepped aside on Sunday and endorsed Harris, the message from donors was, let's bleeping go.
There was a lot of LFG texts. And,
Alexandra Acker-Lyons raises money for female Democratic candidates.
Walk me through those early hours.
Just people coming out of the woodwork. Okay, I'm in. What do I do? How do I give? Where do I give?
Since Sunday, the campaign says it's raised more than $125 million, the largest haul in the race so far, plus $150 million donated to the super PAC Future Forward, with nearly 900,000 grassroots donors giving for the first time this cycle.
As soon as I heard Kamala was on the ticket, I got on, I donated so fast.
Harris was the only option. I am thrilled to have donated to her.
Kamala Harris being a woman, being a person of color, being young, it is my first time donating.
We are seeing everyone from the $10 donor to the $1,000 donor showing their support for the vice president.
She's never backed down from a challenge.
Harris has also inherited $240 million that's been controlled by the Biden campaign.
We trust women to know what is in their own best interest.
She and her running mate can use Biden's campaign funds because she was already running with the president.
From the moment we take back the White House from...
And the pressure is on. The Biden campaign fell behind Trump in cash on hand for the first time last month, as the former president drew the endorsement of some Silicon Valley billionaires like Elon Musk.
I think you're seeing a lot of money pouring into Trump's campaign because they want deregulation on, for AI, the internet, and all that stuff.
Hollywood director and Democratic donor Rob Reiner.
What are your colleagues and friends in Hollywood telling you about what they think of Vice President Harris?
Well, they like her. I mean, I hosted Vice President Harris a couple of weeks ago here at our house. Billy Crystal and a number of other people said, wow.
Ultimately, in this election, we each face a question.
And here's one more wow. One major Democratic donor told CBS News the candidates may spend $1 billion each by Election Day.
There is zero question in my mind that we will raise all the funds that we need to make sure that the vice president's message gets out there.
Former President Trump has a massive war chest. Can Vice President Harris catch up?
Yeah, there's no question.
So now that Harris is the likely nominee, that Hollywood freeze on checks that went down after the debate, that's definitely thawed. We saw George Clooney endorsing Harris after calling on Biden to get out of the race. You also have Rob Reiner saying he's going to be making additional donations alongside his wife, even Beyonce, letting Harris use her freedom song. So there's a lot of engagement now back from Hollywood, both coasts, multiple Democratic donors tonight telling me they were happy with that speech from the president.
You're our business and technology correspondent. And one of the other interesting things about Kamala Harris is the memes. I mean, she is just going viral on a number of fronts.
Yeah, Democratic donors are telling me that they like how memeable Kamala Harris is. They say it will hopefully work with younger voters. Also want to note that today Harris made the case for Black women voters and really drawing the contrast between herself and former President Trump. And another interesting group that we are following, Indian Americans have become the largest group of Asian Americans and most politically active. And you can expect to see her and Usha Vance, the wife of a possible second lady, making the case to the Asian American community as well.
Thank you. And John, what about how Donald Trump has tried to pivot now that he's running against Kamala Harris?
Well, the first thing he's done is he's blamed her for every possible bad thing in the Biden presidency and the heartbreak of psoriasis. I mean, she's blaming him for everything. The second thing is she's a liberal, San Francisco. That's a traditional attack. I think the third thing will be Joe Biden said the stakes were so high, that's why he had to get out of the race. Donald Trump and Republicans will say, wait a minute, you had to get out of the race because your party didn't think you had the capacity to stay in the job. And Kamala Harris was there, and there's a cover-up. And then finally, we should remember that the president, and there was reporting today about Republicans warning their own people to watch out for sexism and racism. This is the president who rose to office by being the country's chief birther, raising questions about where Barack Obama was born. That is in his bones, and that is surely a move he will go back to. It's obviously a risk for him.
He did say tonight, people think I'm going to be nice after I was nearly assassinated, but I'm not going to be nice. That's what he said. And so then he proceeded to level a number of these attacks that you mentioned. All right, coming up, how Biden's departure from the 2024 race evokes memories of the chaos in 1968.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
The heart of storytelling.
I'm enabling them to feel valued.
From the heart of America.
Wow.
Eye on America. Weeknights on the CBS Evening News.
I'm 48 Hours' Erin Moriarty. Join me on a true crime journey to justice on my original podcast, My Life of Crime.
And this picture just in from the Oval Office as the president made his remarks tonight. You can see he was surrounded by family. His son, Hunter Biden, and his wife, Ashley Biden, his daughter and her husband, as well as the First Lady of the United States. But we're told the entire Oval Office was packed with family and close friends tonight. Now this, Mark Twain once said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. President Biden's stunning decision to not seek re-election is certainly historic. But as our Mark Strassman reports, it also echoes another president's choice in another turbulent year, 1968.
Tested many times this past year.
Revolt clawed at Lyndon Johnson early in 1968, an unpopular incumbent targeted by fellow Democrats. Sound familiar?
2024 is very reminiscent of 1968 for a variety of reasons.
Historian Mark Updegrove is president and CEO of the LBJ Foundation. We spoke about striking parallels between Presidents Johnson and Biden and between 1968's America and today's.
Mood of the country. Divided, tempestuous, a lot of extreme rhetoric. We had the same thing in 1968, and that we were being shaken to our very foundations.
Especially divisive then, Vietnam, America's sons and daughters dying in Southeast Asia. CBS News' Walter Cronkite was a turning point. The most trusted man in America declared the war was unwinnable.
It seems now more certain than ever that the bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate.
Johnson believed losing Cronkite on Vietnam meant his re-election was also unwinnable. In March 1968, he quit the race.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
Updegrove says that decision, like President Biden's to step aside, was more than political. There were health concerns.
LBJ truly believed that he might jeopardize the country because his heart might fail.
But Democrats have to wonder whether 1968 is also a cautionary tale. In the race to keep the Oval Office, look at what happened once LBJ stepped aside.
First, a double tragedy.
Memphis today is officially in mourning.
Martin Luther King murdered in Memphis. Robert Kennedy.
Now it's on to Chicago and let's win there. Thank you.
Gunned down in a Los Angeles hotel kitchen.
We can achieve nothing by lawlessness and divisiveness.
When Butler, Pennsylvania happened, did you think to yourself, another similarity?
Without question. Just as in 1968, you had the feeling that anything could happen next.
Like Chicago's 1968 Democratic National Convention. Outside, mayhem. Cops bloodied anti-war protesters in the streets. Inside, rancor.
But don't push me, take your hands off of me.
Divided delegates nominated Hubert Humphrey, LBJ's vice president. Mr. Biden has endorsed his VP, Kamala Harris.
I seek to lead a great nation.
Humphrey, wounded by chaos, lost in November to Richard Nixon. Today's Democrats, mindful of party history, meet in their national convention next month, again in Chicago.
Biden opting not to run for the presidency again could unite the Democratic Party.
Which of the parallels resonates most with you?
What our democracy looks like today, but we should also remember that we came out of 1968 ultimately a stronger, better nation.
A nation again shocked by a sitting president, feeling scorned, bowing out. Mark Strassman, CBS News, Austin.
And we are once again trying to keep up with the history that keeps unfolding before our eyes. Our coverage will continue on CBS News 24/7, your local news, and for some of you on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News special report. For all of my colleagues at CBS News, I'm Norah O'Donnell.
The heart of storytelling.
I'm enabling them to feel valued.
From the heart of America.
Wow.
Eye on America. Weeknights on the CBS Evening News.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Daily Report. I'm John Dickerson in our Washington, D.C. bureau this evening. Thank you for joining us. President Biden addressed the nation from the Oval Office Wednesday night. It was the president's first public remarks since his decision to drop out of the presidential race on Sunday. President Biden said the best way forward was to pass the torch to a new generation.
You know, there is a time and a place for long years of experience in public life. There's also a time and a place for new voices, fresh voices, yes, younger voices. And that time and place is now.
Our Errol Barnett has more on tonight's presidential address from Studio 57 in New York City.
All right, John, thank you very much. We want to begin by breaking down the president's speech, some of the key takeaways, and how this could affect his legacy moving forward. CBS News correspondent Skylar Henry joins me from Capitol Hill with more on that. I'm wondering, Skylar, the president did stumble slightly through this speech. We know his family was in the room. It's an incredibly enormous moment. What stood out to you as he made his remarks?
Yeah, Errol, 4 points. And I think contextually, considering what this means for President Biden, really wrapping up 50 years of public service, it was one that talked about just really where he wants the country to go, what he believes in terms of democracy in and of itself, and what he really wants to see in terms of the remainder of his term. 4 points really stood out to me, and it talked about the main one, I think, is that does character in public life still matter? Obviously, taking a veiled swipe at former President Donald Trump and some of his rhetoric and remarks that he certainly has made along the campaign trail. Aside from that, and what you heard from President Biden there, talking about passing that torch to the new generation, the next generation, really leaning into that endorsement of Vice President Kamala Harris becoming the likely Democratic nominee. And also the president saying that he reveres the office, but he loves his country, and also saying that democracy is at stake and nothing can come in the way of that, including personal ambition. You know how rare this is for an incumbent president to not seek re-election. And so for him to make these remarks, to make this decision following all the scrutiny that he's faced over the course of the last, let's call it a month or so, I think was a tremendous one. And so I think in this 11 to 12 minute speech, he certainly sort of laid it out there for the American people, really, and saying the choice is now yours. It's up to you, the American voter, to continue this moving forward, and you are going to be the reason the country sort of goes in the way that it does. And I think that certainly was a compelling sort of reminder, saying that this is ultimately you guys' decision in terms of where the country goes from here, and the president obviously leaning into that tonight.
And as this brings to an end his 5-decade-plus career of public service, it's also interesting to acknowledge the weight on his family and those close to him as he reached this very difficult decision. First Lady Dr. Jill Biden released a statement online, a handwritten statement that's been translated into text, saying, "To those who never wavered, to those who refused to doubt, to those who always believed, my heart is full of gratitude. Thank you for the trust you put in Joe. Now it's time to put that trust in Kamala." There were some inside Democratic leadership that had been pushing Biden to drop out of the race, despite his belief that his record and his skills meant he was the man to take on Donald Trump as the only nationally elected politician to beat Trump. Remind us how we got to what was a very difficult decision for the president, how we got here.
Well, I think, I think a lot of us will pay attention to that Atlanta debate on June 27th, where Biden went up against the former president and seemed to stumble and almost appeared confused at times, something that he himself admits was a bad performance. That sort of sounded the alarms, if you will, among Democrats, both publicly and privately. And then really in the weeks following that, certain polling as it relates to where the horse race stood between Biden and Trump in certain battleground and swing states, certainly important for whichever of these nominees were to secure the win and then obviously get back into the White House. And once he started to see those numbers start to dip, I think that is really what turned the tide, if you will, in terms of the president reconsidering his bid for the White House. But it's not just in those swing states. The president was losing momentum in normally blue states as well, New Mexico, New Jersey, states that otherwise would have, been easily secured by presidents or a Democrat. And I think because of that weakening number in terms of the polls, that's when those closest to the president really had to gather up and decide how they wanted to move forward. Notable that the president did decide to endorse his vice president, Kamala Harris. We've talked about the enthusiasm surrounding her campaign. Just in the first few days of that campaign announcement, they've raised more than $100 million in terms of grassroots donations. Obviously, we're seeing many of the Democratic subgroups, if you will, under that huge tent, New Democrats, moderate Democrats, progressive Democrats, young Democrats, all saying that they are behind the vice president. And she's been out on the campaign trail looking to earn that support as well, making phone calls every single day to try to ensure that those who may be skeptical or may be concerned about this process, if you will, are standing behind her. Obviously, the big names are by her as well. Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, just to name a few. And we've seen really Democrats on the federal and state level all come out to say that they are standing behind the vice president. Now we'll see exactly what that path looks like for her to secure the nomination officially. And then the other big question, Errol, is who she decides to run with.
That's right. And with the election now just 100+ days away. Skylar Henry, thank you very much.
You bet.
President Biden's decision to leave the race now puts him on a small list of other U.S. presidents who've done the same. For example, the last time this happened was back in 1968 when Lyndon B. Johnson announced he would not seek a second term. Before that, Harry Truman withdrew from his race in 1952. 5 other presidents also did the same in the mid to late 1800s. Lindsay Shavinsky joins us now. She's the executive director of the George Washington Presidential Library and the author of Making the Presidency, John Adams and the Precedents that Forged the Republic. It's great to have you with us on such a big night. So let's talk about the precedents of presidents doing this type of thing. How big of a decision was this for President Biden to not run again despite showing nothing but passion in the months leading up to this?
Well, it was absolutely historic. As you could see in the speech tonight, Biden really loves this office. He loves everything that it represents and the history behind it. And I think that's because it takes a certain personality type. It takes a certain ego. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but a certain ego to believe that you are up to the challenges of the office, that you are the person that should be making those nearly impossible decisions that are going to cross the resolute desk. And so for a person like that to get to that place, especially after 5 decades of public service, and then to walk away is a very rare thing in American history, and I would say in human history much more broadly.
And so considering how rare it is, I wonder how this moment compares to other presidents who've done similar things, because what he said in his speech tonight included comments like, quote, "Nothing can get in the way of democracy, even personal ambition. It's time for a new, fresh voice, and yes, even younger voices." I mean, specifically removing himself, he says, for the sake of the country and the party. How does that compare to presidents who've done similar things?
So I think it separates him a little bit, because when Harry S. Truman stepped down, he did so in recognition, of course, that he himself was quite unpopular, but also in recognition that the Republican candidate was going to be Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was in some ways very similar in terms of foreign policy. He was going to reject the more isolationist strain represented by Robert Taft on the extreme wing of the Republican Party. And so I think Truman felt safe that the outcome would not destroy the United States. And for Lyndon Johnson, the Vietnam War was so unpopular that it really kind of destroyed the entire Democratic Party. And while, again, he disagreed with Nixon on a lot of things, the Nixon of Watergate years was still in the future, and he was not seen as this dangerous menace. Whereas I think Biden and most of the Democrats view Trump as a threat to the republic, a mortal threat to the nation that has to be defeated at all costs.
And so considering all of that, how does this decision impact the 51st year of Biden's public service and legacy? How does this button kind of complete the overall picture?
Well, the tricky thing about presidential legacies is it often depends on what happens next. That's how we actually view them. So who follows them changes our ideas about their time in office. You know, a great example of this is George W. Bush's popularity ratings just skyrocketed during Trump's time in office. And so I think it does depend a great deal on what happens in November. If Harris wins, I think that this will be kind of the crowning achievement in Biden's public service. He will be seen as a champion for democracy. If she loses, I still think this moment is a historic one and it's extraordinary, but there might be questions about should he have stepped aside sooner or should he have done something different to try and defeat Trump.
Such an important detail to acknowledge, that it depends what happens next with what this means in the larger picture. I'm curious what stood out to you from the president's speech. He often refers to his family. He often has a very folksy texture to how he speaks to the public. And he ended by saying, wow, you know, so remarkable that a kid, you know, from Scranton, Pennsylvania with a stutter made it to the Resolute desk. I thought that was such a powerful phrase. What stood out to you from what the president said from the Oval Office tonight?
Well, I love that part, too, because to me, what comes through in this speech is Biden's belief in the United States, in its capacity and its potential and its promise, even if we have been imperfect in executing that promise, which he did acknowledge. I thought the speech was really interesting in that it was bookended by principles. It started with history and it ended by this call to the better angels or the spirit of America, things that we can try and aspire to. And then in the middle, of course, he did have the politics. He had the things that he hoped he was remembered for, and he had the things that he hoped would help Harris. But I liked that that was not the beginning or the end. And instead, he did put it in the larger context. And although we couldn't see the portraits that he was referencing, there have been pictures of his Oval Office. And I think it does help remind him of the stakes of the moment when he's seen all of those famous faces in front of him.
And moving forward and considering now the historic nature of Vice President Kamala Harris, you know, poised to win the Democratic nomination for the presidency, she would be the first woman of color as a major party nominee. There's this swell of support and enthusiasm all of a sudden for Democrats because of that. But if we think back to the 2016 election, Senator Clinton, or I should say Secretary Clinton, lost despite the historical nature of that race against Donald Trump. What is the significance of a potential Harris presidency, and how might that help or hurt her chances?
The United States is the only democratic society in the world that has not had a female head of state. And so I think that moment, whenever it comes, whether it's this year or in the future, will be a really important one, because we as humans are actually not that imaginative, and our brains have trouble envisioning things that we haven't seen before. And so until we actually see a woman in that position of power, it will be hard for little girls around the world to think that they too can do that, to see the presidency as a type of leadership that women can embody as well. I think it will be interesting to see over the next couple of months how this campaign maybe differs from 2016. Did Hillary Clinton start to sort of soften the ground to make people more comfortable with the concept of a female president, even if she didn't win? And so will it be just a touch easier for Harris to try and get to that higher office?
So interesting. Lindsay Stravinsky, great to have you with us on such an important night. I appreciate you speaking with us.
Thank you for having me.
And we want to bring you this note from a Trump campaign official confirming that former President Trump did in fact watch President Biden's Oval Office address aboard his plane shortly after he concluded his rally in Charlotte tonight. And so certainly we expect the former president to speak more about that in the days and weeks ahead. For now, though, we're going to take a very short break. My colleague John Dickerson will be back with more of the day's biggest news. You're streaming CBS News 24/7.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is